Hi there, welcome to Boxing Deep Dive. I'm Lynden Hosking, and great to have you along for another episode of Classic Fights. We missed last week, we all had a little bit on, but great to have you back. And we've got probably one of the best ones we've done ever, I think, in this episode. I'm probably just saying that because I thought of it. But I'd like to welcome in this week's co-host with me, Mike Altamura. Great to have you along, mate.
I definitely think, this is the fight. When people talk about the fight or the fight of the century, everybody knows what you're referring to. And this is one of those bouts that I think anyone that had lived in that era, there was years of anticipation, and then it definitely met the hype when it played out.
Well, it's probably it was probably earlier in the century. There was some other ones like Lewis Schmeling and those types of ones, but I suppose in the modern era of that time, it was the biggest fight of all time. And I think actually up to that time, it was the biggest fight of all time. The one we're, of course, referring to is the fight, or the fight of the century, whatever you want to call it. Is, of course, Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. The first fight, World Heavyweight Championship, March 15th, 1971, took place at the world-famous Madison Square Garden. Now, Mike, it's probably, what do you say about this fight? I mean, as I said, it is up to that point the biggest. What do you say? Where do you start?
I think where I start is with one of my favorite mementos in my collection, which is Life magazine. I don't know if you can see this now, but Life magazine, Battle of the Champs, and this came out just a week before fight week. And I think that it was, to put it in context, I don't think it's necessary that you and I go over every component of the bout because of how well known this bout is amongst fight fans. But essentially, you have two Olympic gold medalists, two undefeated fighters. Ali, the prior champion, of course, controversially, in hindsight, stripped because of his stance against the Vietnam War, refusing to be drafted into the war. Frazier come along, and Frazier was kind of embraced by America. I think now, hindsight, Ali's remembered glowingly, but in that era, Ali was a highly controversial figure, and Frazier was kind of epitomized, I suppose, the athlete and the person that white America wanted Muhammad Ali to be. And so you had these two very, very different contrasting worlds colliding, and it provided a lot of banter. Frazier preferred to do his talking in the ring. Ali, of course, could do his talking in the ring, but didn't mind. He's a student of the professional wrestler Gorgeous George's school of mind trickery and politicking. And, Ali knew how to draw Frazier into that chit-chat. And it just had everything. Boxer versus puncher, taller versus shorter fighter, predominantly left-hand hooking Joe Frazier versus Ali, beautiful left jab. It really was a chance to see how their two weapons were going to match. And despite the fact Ali had had a couple fights on the comeback trail with Jerry Quarry and Oscar Bonavena, there was a concern that maybe he was going into the bout a bit underdone, but people also realised that he was a great fighter and you couldn't discount him. But I think generally within the fight community, there was a sense that maybe Frazier was just catching him at the right time.
Because Frazier, I've just got this box rec here, so he'd won the two versions of WBA, WBC, so he'd won the WBA from, which one? Was it Alice? And the WBC from, who was the other one from? Was that from Quarry or was that from someone else? Buster Mathis was the first one.
Yeah, Mathis was a vacant title.
Yep, so that was in 1968. So obviously he had a win over Oscar Bonavena as well, Jerry Quarry as well, obviously Jimmy Ellis, Bob Foster going into the fight. So, but it was an interesting one, wasn't it? Because as you said, like contrasting personalities, contrasting styles, but also the way the public probably perceived them. Ali was probably one of those fighters, of course, that you either loved or hated. And of course, all the dramas with the army and being jailed. Was he actually jailed or was he just banned? I think he was just banned, wasn't he?
Banned, yeah.
Just banned. So probably a lot of people actually then jumped off him as well. And then apparently a lot of the pro-war advocates jumped on the Frazier bandwagon, and it was just like you said, a perfect storm or a perfect mix of all these ingredients combined, just to create probably the most anticipated fight up to that point of all time.
Yeah, and I mean, just like a little bit of context of the bout. So $20,455 paid at Madison Square Garden. At the time, it did what would be the equivalent today of almost an $11 million gate.
Yep.
The fight grossed what in today's economy would be over $300 million in the USA alone on closed circuit sales.
Crazy.
Now, keep in mind that I know a lot of things have changed in society with licensing and everything, but back then it wasn't just as simple as click and buy on a pay-per-view within your own household. You literally had to go to find a local theatre that was showing the bout.
Is that the closed circuit? I was going to ask you, what's the difference between closed circuit and pay-per-view? So closed circuit is a theatre.
Yeah, so closed circuit is essentially what we've seen on our side of the world with pubs and clubs purchasing, know, they might pay a $1,500 license fee and they purchase the event. So back in the days prior to pay-per-view, it was all run on closed circuit. Even in the UK, over 90,000 tickets sold on closed circuit. United States, over 2.5 million. When you think of what, it's like roughly 1.5 times the US, 1.5%, sorry, the US population buying a ticket to watch this contest. It's just all of what this generated leading in is unparalleled in terms of where there's data. Probably Joe Louis and Max Schmeling, the rematch, did greater numbers, but it was a different era. But in terms of where there's verifiable data, this fight's the highest grossing of all time when you look at all the factors, and rightfully so because of everything we listed. One of the interesting parts is, and I'll see if I can find the page in this Life magazine, because it was a photo that I hadn't recalled seeing previously until I went through it again today, and it gave a bit of context. So, so hopefully this comes up. That's Ali there 4 weeks out, and 230 pounds plus. Now that would become somewhat the embodiment of Ali in his later days, but through to that stage of his career, 4 weeks out from a fight, I don't think he had ever been seemingly that out of condition. So that was one of the concerns in the back of a lot of people's minds, is that maybe he was just slightly underdone. Maybe he needed a couple more fights before being geared up to take on the challenger FRAZIER. But Ali was also considered to be the greater athlete. And like I said, because he was unbeaten, no one was ever going to discount his capabilities of winning this bout. But it's got everything you love about boxing. And then, of course, you look at the corners. You got, two of the greatest corners ever.
So was it Angelo Dundee, Mundine, Gil Clancy, I think, was with, or was Eddie Futch back then?
Eddie Futch
for FRAZIER. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so Angelo Dundee versus Eddie Futch. I mean, it doesn't get any greater than that.
No, well, you said about the weight. So Ali weighed 215, so obviously he's lost 15 pound or whatever it was those last few weeks, which is 98 kilos. FRAZIER was 205, which is 93 kilos. So not neither one of them, especially FRAZIER, were in today's standards necessarily big heavyweights. I suppose they were back then, but I was looking at, you stole my thunder a little bit with some of the facts. I can't believe you just read it off the top of your mind. I had to write it down with the purses and the equivalent. They got 2.5 million each, which is equivalent to 17 million. Now, these days, you could probably add another zero to that, I would think, wouldn't you, with 170 million? But back then, that's still a lot of money.
Well, the thing is as well, it's that there wasn't infrastructure in play back then. There wasn't infrastructure in terms of satellites and things of that nature to broadcast fights around the world. Most of these kind of fights actually ran on delay. They might have gone live to, I'm just plucking a number, but there might have been infrastructure in, say, 40 to 50 countries to operate live, and the others was just closed circuit on delay. You didn't have, the Middle East wasn't built to the point that it is now. This is a kind of bout that you could see Saudi Arabia throwing $350 million in this day and age at this contest. Like that's how much it moves the needle. But putting it in context of that era, and then I think that what we also need to look at is the prices of housing. So if you look at the prices of housing and that, $17 million in that era, the equivalent of 17 million, would be able to buy you probably double the housing that the same equivalent would now because of
Yep.
inflation rates in different markets. So, when you look at that kind of payday for both of these gentlemen, 2.5 million in 1971. What I think is astounding, especially on Ali's side, he had already made his money, he'd had his layoff, but it's not like he had just squandered everything he had earned. The fact that both these guys were still active at the end of the decade is just incredible.
Yeah, it is, and I think, I'm not sure whether you mentioned before, but a ringside seat was $150. That's all it was back then, equivalent to about $1,000. These days, you probably pay $100,000 for the same seat, wouldn't you? These days, considering what people paid to Mayweather Pacquiao.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, you look at the event grossed, like I said, by 2022 standards, close to $11 million equivalent. And when a ringside seat is $150 in that day and age, $1,000, understandably so. These days, it would probably be $4,000 to $5,000 at a minimum, the first 5 to 10 rows, and then they would be on the secondary market, probably bumped up to $7,500 to $8,000. So it's, again, context matters when you look at how massive these fights were, because we can just sit here and say, all right, well, the gross was approximate 11 million 2022 standards, and somebody will come on statistics of, say, the forthcoming third bout between Canelo and Triple G, and that might very well do near comparable numbers, but you've got to understand the context, the reach, and also the earning capacities within society too.
Yeah, exactly. Let's get into the fight itself. So it's fair to say that every man and his dog was here literally at this fight, because judging by even some of the movies we've seen that have actually featured this fight, obviously the Ali biopic himself, but also the movie which was American Gangster was highlighting this. Every as I said, every man and his dog was there. The clothes they had on, where it was all about status, where you sat and all this sort of stuff. It was just the event for sporting and non-sporting and boxing and non-boxing fans, wasn't it? You just had to be there.
Yeah, like you said, it was a social event first and foremost. Then it was an athletic contest, and then thirdly, it was a boxing contest. It wasn't just like, let's go see these crude boxers. This was the place to be. It was a social outing, and you see here early in the fight just the disparity in speed between them. But Frazier having his success, bobbing, able to read Ali's timing a little bit, get inside and land the hook, but Ali was controlling a lot of these early rounds off that left jab.
Yeah, and I must admit, one thing, I know it's a very minor point, but one thing that actually struck me from this fight, has always fascinated me, is that even just the outfits the guys are wearing, I'm not sure about you, I've never seen Ali before or after this wear red, am I wrong? Maybe he has, but he always wore the white with the black or whatever it was, but it's just always that. You talk about the mesh of everything, the even just the outfits the guys wore just blended beautifully, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, especially watching it in colour, you got to think 1971. A lot of people watching this in black and white, but in colour, both fighters are so distinctive to see. I actually love, between the two, I love Frazier's trunks. I just think that they're just such a contrast to his skin tone.
Yep.
But they're so historic, those trunks.
They
you
are.
Remember, when you think of Frazier's career, you remember him in these trunks in this particular bout.
That's right. And it just, as I said, like Ali, maybe he did fight, was it Bonavina or one of those guys, mate? I can't remember, but I just can't remember him in red trunks. And it's just the mesh of the styles, plus even the outfits and everything that goes with it. Just another chapter to this whole thing. But to the fight itself, do you think that Ali, even though he had the layoff, he had a couple of fights coming back, but obviously hadn't been under the same pressure that Frazier would put on him. Do you think that was a factor as well? Obviously, he'd fought Lynden a few years before, and do you think this is the fighter that the fight we expected to get with Lynden, but we got it with Frazier instead?
Yeah, I believe so, because of, you got to remember too, this is before Frazier had been stopped twice by George Foreman, so he was punching with reckless abandon. He didn't particularly have a respect for Ali's power. He was punching with him. You see here, as soon as Ali's touched him with that shot, bang, he's trying to come back with something. Trying to read Ali's left hand, always coming back with his own hook. And what I thought was really impressive from Frazier's side was that, although I probably consider it 4-1, the first 5 rounds with Ali,
Yep.
Frazier was digging to the body and head and making Ali think. You see Ali expending a lot of petrol to really try and hold him at bay and negate him from the outside.
Yeah. I did check the scorecards today, and I did actually, I'd read it before that Ali, I won't say dominated, but won the first 5 rounds clearly. But looking at the scorecards, it was actually Frazier that was 3 rounds to 2 up, which was surprising because I'm with you. I watched the replay and thought to myself, this is before I checked the scorecards, that Ali, I thought, won 4 of the first 5 rounds. But obviously the judges didn't see it that way. But can you imagine, just looking at this, obviously a 15-round fight, do you think we've ever seen a fighter like Frazier? I know we've had Tyson, who probably punched harder than Frazier, but it's the work rate. It's the consistent pressure. It's the bobbing, the weaving, just not giving him 1 second grace. I don't think from memory I've ever seen a fighter with the work rate of Joe Frazier and the power to go with it.
Not at heavyweight. I mean,
At
Henry
heavyweight,
Armstrong.
Yeah.
Henry Armstrong was very similar, frenetic energy, but that's a guy that essentially was from featherweight to welterweight throughout his career. So you kind of anticipate that little bit of athleticism. But like you said, with Frazier, it's a relentless work rate. It's the power. But I think what's deceiving with Frazier historically, and you've seen it here, a lot of these punches, he's just touching Ali, touch, and then bang.
Get the
and
range,
I think that's where he's having success because he's sneaking in. See, even that hook, touching hook.
Yeah.
It's not like he's trying to level Ali with every punch he's throwing. He's racking up points, he's staying active, he's staying busy, and forcing him to work under pressure.
It was a great game plan because, as I said before, like Tyson was probably, he always was on you, but he didn't have the work rate. Yes, he would throw bombs, but it'd be 1 or 2 at a time, and most of the time, especially later, it was clinching. But Frazier, who obviously had the left hook, but not the overall power. But just that being in his face the whole time. I mean, anyone else except Ali, no doubt, would have, especially on this night, would have been dropped pretty early. But I just couldn't get over just that 15 rounds of just never stop, just every round one after the other, the same style. But I've got to say, Eddie Futch and the game plan in this, it was brilliant because you can see there, like you said, he was touch to get close to the range, and then he would unleash the hook and he'd come over that lazy right hand that Ali had as well. So it's just a brilliant game plan.
And you've got to think of how dangerous a tactic it is as well to be consistently moving into Ali's right hand. See it time and again, but it was essentially to smother him and take away the jab, take away the rhythm that Ali built off the jab and then go to work. But that comes with the danger. You're right there to be hit with an uppercut. You're there to be hit with a counter right hand. But I think Frazier's team knew that if they could nullify that left hand and make Ali miss, that, like I said before, that he's going to expend a lot of petrol. That's here, round 11. Probably should have been considered a knockdown, but you can see why. Stepped on probably a little bit of water in the corner, and the great referee Arthur McKenney Sr. gave him, some grace. But I think and interestingly enough on the cards, the fight is anyone's game coming into these last 5-6 rounds. So,
and I couldn't see that. I thought, especially after the 5th round, up until the 10th, 11th, 12th, that Frazier pretty much dominated. And the scorecard sort of reflected that in the end, I suppose. Frazier won the last few rounds, but just an unbelievably fast-paced fight for heavyweights. And I don't think there's probably been a fight since this that was fought at the pace that this fight was fought at this weight I'm talking about.
No, not with 2 guys.
Except for probably the 3rd fight of this series.
Yeah, but that was more like a bruising encounter. Yeah. This is my favourite fight of their series because of the fact that it's a mix of brutality and athleticism at the same time.
And heart.
Willpower and spirit, heart. It's got a bit of everything, but because they were both physically fresher and closer to their prime years, you see the dexterity, the footwork, the movement, everything, all the great attributes of both of them.
Yep.
And you can also see, like, I watched this fight, and I feel like you can see that Ali, probably with 1 or 2 more hit-outs, would have been considerably sharper, but you still can't take away the glory from Frazier.
Oh, 100%. Do you think also, just based on Ali's strategy, that maybe he wanted to probably take Frazier on a little bit more, and that was maybe a bit of his downfall as well? Because even though he's moving backwards, you don't see, maybe it's to do with his age and ring rust and everything else, but you don't see that great lateral movement that you would normally get from Ali in his fights.
Yeah, I think it's because I really look at it as tactics. I think, yeah, maybe that split-second speed that Ali lost a bit. But I think that Frazier went into overdrive to take away Ali's right side. So he only had one way to step to escape at all times.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I suppose that really stood out to me as well, one was, as I said before, the work rate of Frazier and the condition both guys are in, just unbelievable. But also the chin of Ali, the amount of left hooks that that guy took that have knocked out previous guys. See, just there. I know he got knocked down in the 15th round and maybe in the 11th, but the jaw on this guy, or the chin, they call him the greatest fighter, but probably the greatest chin of all time as well. It's unbelievable.
Well, it's about to come up in the next round. But
Yeah.
I still, to this day, 51 years later, try to figure out how this man found a way to get up from that punch there.
And so quickly.
In round 15. Round 15.
Yeah.
Hey, but he was exhausted. You can talk about conditioning or whatever. He was exhausted at this point in the fight. He had to know when he went down that he couldn't win.
And you can see Frazier there. He just, even though he was in front, he just did not stop. Even though he's had him, and look at his face as well. He's busted up. I mean, just a war of attrition. But I mean, as I said with Ali with the jaw, but also just the heart of the guy, and just not just his fight, but also the thriller in Manila, and obviously against Foreman. But just special guys. And I know Frazier met his kryptonite in Foreman, but apart from that, he was probably the only fighter to ever really get the best of him, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Frazier and Norton, same school of boxing, so they both brought, certain tricks in that gave Ali a real lot of trouble in his prime years. But that's the one night I think that you look at Ali's career and there's no excuses. Like I said, you can talk about the layoff or whatever, but they ran it back twice, and of course Ali attained his revenge and came out on top of the series. But that was Joe Frazier's night, and that's the night that realistically cements Joe Frazier as one of the greatest heavyweights of all time.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one too, isn't it? With like you said then, like Frazier got this one, Ali obviously got the second one, but it's hard to really. I mean, the second one wasn't the greatest fight of, let's face it. It was a masterclass by Ali, of course, and then of course it was a battle of the heart and ticker and guts and everything else in the third one. But I think this is the fight though that both, at the peak, I know you could probably give Ali a bit of leeway because of the inactivity, but as far as the careers goes and everything else, this was at the peak, and so you got to give Joe Frazier full respect. The scores, of course, were 144, 141, 144, 140, and 146, 138. So comprehensive in the end for Frazier. But like I said, mate, they fought twice. I'll tell you what, this twice more. What this sort of reminded me of this trilogy was Duran and Leonard. Same thing. You had the Duran in the first fight, who just fought like a man possessed. And yes, he lost the next two fights to Leonard, but you could never really take away from him the fact that he got the one that really counted.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is as well that similar to Frazier in a way, I think Duran really had cemented his name as a lightweight, regardless, amongst real fight aficionados. But that's the fight that broke him out to the mainstream, is, that upset over Leonard in the first bout. And I think the same for Frazier. This is the one that really broke him out into the mainstream. The first guy to put an hour on Muhammad Ali's professional record, and to do it in the fashion that he did, he was forever embraced as a great champion because of that.
And what was good about this, similar to, again, the Leonard Duran trilogy as well, is that they were such bitter rivals during their whole careers, but afterwards become the best of friends. They wouldn't admit it publicly, but they were.
Yeah, and I mean, look, a lot of the things that Ali said to rile Frazier, I know that he kind of looked upon regretfully in later years, calling him an Uncle Tom and things of that nature, and insulting his commitment to the cause of African Americans in the United States. I think that a lot of that really cut deeply for Joe, but he found the place in his heart to forgive Ali and realize that it was just gamesmanship at the time. But it's something that we're missing in sports nowadays. I think because we have the cancel police out in full force, so things never really get to a point that needle really builds between various camps. But it sure did make the sport exciting to follow. Like, you still look back on it. You talk to anyone that lived that era, and they still look back on these kind of nights with the highest of adulation and respect for both fighters with excitement. And like I said, you just don't see that in the sport anymore.
Well, give me that era any day. I know we talk about it often here, but these days it's we joke about it. Who's got the most social media followers, and they fight once or twice a year, and if they're lucky, and it's just different now. And you've got obviously different rival promoters who won't promote with others because of certain reasons fights don't get made. But back then, obviously the fight did get made, and fights like that got made. Of course, Frazier fought Foreman, and Foreman fought Ali, and then going into the later decades after that. But just an unbelievable fight, and I really enjoyed sitting down and watching. I haven't seen it for a long time, so it was great to sit down and watch it again. And if you're out there and you haven't seen it, make sure you watch it. One of the most, the classic fights, as we're saying here, of all time. And surprised it's taken us this long to actually get to it. So if you haven't seen it, watch it, mate. So that's that one out the road now. We're actually off for a couple of weeks because I'm away. When we get back, I think we touched on it last week. I want to do the next one, and you're going to be first up. Your I'll spit that out. Your 5 favourite fights of all time. So we're going to go through it from 5 down to 1. I want to hear what, obviously, so it's going to have to be a bit of an abbreviated version of what we normally do on this show. We've got 1 fight, but I want you to do the 5 favourite fights, why they're special to you, and give our viewers a bit of input into some of the fights they should be watching. So that's on you.
I might actually have to provide you the footage of some of these bouts.
That's fine, mate. Send it through. Send the links.
I don't think they're actually online. And that's a shame. Like throughout boxing history, unless something was really on a mainstream network, a lot of these fights, even the fights that ran on ESPN in the 80s, most of them are lost to time unless someone's archived them. Like the major world title fights have been kept, but like the 6 round for the 4 6-round fights, the weekly televised bouts are all lost. You rarely even see them pop up on YouTube. So, that's going to be a melon scratcher, that one. I've got to think.
We'll see how you go anyway. But look, it might just be a narrative of the whole thing rather than we might get some pictures of it, whatever. But either way, you've got you'll have about 5 minutes per fight just to go through, and then we'll do Tassie after that. So just something a little bit different. Then we'll obviously get back to the normal concept, but just something to throw in there. And I think I did it on my Talking Boxing show a few weeks ago. It was good just to go through. I did my 5 favourite fighters of all time as well, so maybe we can do that at some stage as well. But just a little bit something just to give our viewers a little bit more insight and input into the history of boxing. This is what this channel's for, especially this show. So, so to get your head around, you've got a couple of weeks to think about it, mate, but have a think about it. The 5 favourite fights of all time.
Yeah, perfect.
All right, mate.
Well, thanks for forward to that.
Sounds good, mate. Well, thanks for coming on. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. And again, if you haven't seen the fight, check it out. Thanks, guys.